Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. It is September 27th, 2023, and we are about to embark on a walk. We're headed out to Friedrich Wilderness Park, and that's somewhat across town. And I had attempted to go there yesterday, but there was some kind of an accident on the highway that would take me there. So I ended up turning around and going to my backup location. I shouldn't even call it my backup location. I went to an alternate location. And both of these locations are excellent wildlife corridors where you can see all kinds of wildlife. On that same note, not all of the wildlife that can be seen is being seen anymore in those areas. And part of that is because the times have been very challenging as far as wildlife can be concerned. Times have been absolutely challenging. And in the same way that they've been challenging for wildlife in terms of the drought, the extreme winters that we have experienced, and so on, not to mention all of the traffic that's going on around the habitat of the wilderness. Can you imagine if you had all these things to contend with, including shortages of food, and you had to, quote unquote, cross a border, the sidewalk, go across the street? There's no telling what you might encounter. So, as time has gone by, and as I've noticed less and less wildlife in some of these areas that I'm going to, and as I've tried to present this information, I've recognized that it can cause a little bit of anxiety in the people who are unprepared to hear truth. Truth is oftentimes avoided in so many places, including spiritual places, where we don't actually get together with our congregation and have a discussion about the true things that are happening, even in our own communities. And I know this because, well, tell me where you have been recently where people are actively participating in changing the scope of what it is they're seeing around them that is not sustainable. So in other words, if someone sees a bunch of plastic around them, knowing that, well, some of what we did, maybe it's not sustainable, or it needs to be at least acknowledged in a certain way. Maybe we can use all these plastic caps as cups, bottles, as caps to regrowing plants, peach trees for an example. Maybe we can do these things and plant some of these things in some of our areas that are able to grow these native fruiting trees. Maybe in these wild spaces where the animals formerly had to go further and further to search for things that were no longer there, maybe suddenly there'd be a fruit tree, and all those seeds would be spread around naturally, intended to, in ways that only nature could tend to it. Whether nature decides to err in our favor, or maybe against our survivability, at least we would have tried. There's something to say, there's something to be said about, and to say, about at least trying. When we don't try, essentially, we've given up. I've heard many of our elders say, well, that's just what happens when you get older. It's only a part of the process when we buy in to believing some of the old ways. If we only believe the old ways, will never leave room for new ways to even present themselves. If we never let go of the old ways, is what I meant, if I didn't say that. If we never look past the old ways, we're only going to see a continuation of a pattern that is currently showcasing changes, climate changes, attitude changes, family bond changes. How we view what we've done in the past changes. And those things, those aspects that can lead to anxiety are the reasons why we don't generally discuss some of these topics in the congregations, if I might put it that way, that we are really no longer participating in, not fully. We can go there to check it off the list and say, well, we did something on Sunday because, we're good. You fill in the denomination there. But most of the people who will come up to you and say, I am a, whatever your denomination of choice is, they're just kind of saying what they say because that's how we've been programmed. And maybe for many people that is good enough. In my mind, the average sinner, and I'll put it that way, can't even acknowledge that they are, in fact, a sinner. We all are we not? We have all done something wrong, sometimes inadvertently, many times very purposefully, as I've found out pretty recently, among direct family members at that. So here I go for my second attempt to have a discussion where I ask a question that has a lot more to do with whether we actually believe in something than anything else. Doesn't have to do with, hey, let's change everything that we're doing. Just has to do with, do we actually have faith? Do we have a belief that we can accomplish something in these challenging times? And why would we even want to accomplish something if it weren't for living up to some expectations that perhaps we know innately in our soul that we must, in fact, live up to in order to gracefully pass away into. So talking about the subject of death that directly, where we imagine it upon ourselves, it can be a powerful thing because some people might not be mentally equipped to face that type of fear. Why would it be a fear that we die at any opportune or inopportune time? Why would it be a fear unless we have a fear that we didn't quite live up to our Father's expectations? Let's call it that way. Even though gender-wise, I don't really mean any disrespect, even if it happened inadvertently. In other words, if what I said was wrong, well, that doesn't take away from the rest of the knowledge that's being discussed. And it's being discussed with quite a few people here. Quite a few people who see these topics. And only maybe a marginal amount will actually participate honestly in these conversations. Because it can cause anxiety. And anxiety can cause a need to multitask, to do something else, to temporarily distract us from whatever it is we are trying to accomplish. Whenever we're multitasking, we're having several things in mind in addition to what should be the all-encompassing scope of of whether or not we give credibility to our higher power. When we give credibility to our higher power, we can see transformation, real transformation. And that's why even in, for an example, the 12-step program, there is an aspect to calling to a higher power. And if you can't acknowledge even that, well, maybe you don't have the self-control that you thought you might have had. Because otherwise, what is it that would be so anger-inducing about this conversation that would cause anyone to just not even like it or not even watch it? I shared one video recently. It was just a short clip showing a ladybug on my nose. Almost to the point where I can say thousands of looks. Many likes, probably because someone saw me smiling. But definitely some dislikes. Probably because someone saw me smiling. There's a lot of jealousy out there, and anger, and whatever emotion you want to put as a negative emotion that usually you might say to someone else, you're projecting. You should see, so you need to see a therapist. The great truth of the matter is that if you can't tell the truth to a real person who you actually know, why would talking with a therapist be any more enlightening? How could it be any more enlightening? Unless we are ashamed of ourselves. And we just don't want to share those kind of things with people we know personally. That's why we can't hang out and talk personally with one another about even personal views. That doesn't stop me from hanging out with someone who wants to talk in the other direction and say, maybe this isn't true because of X, Y, or Z. I probably agree with you if you present a strong enough case. But the one part that I'll keep coming back to in the long run is that there is an extremely unusual proportion ratio of things that are also almost unexplainable. Like, for an example, if I go and, again, for the second day in a row, present that, hey, here I am, I'm doing a rain dance, I'm showing my gratitude, I'm hoping to help others to want to pray with one another for reasonable attainments, reasonable days of fun. And because I even want just the most reasonable amount of fun that could be had among one another, I treat myself to going on a walk, believing that somehow reasonable rainfall can occur if I put a little bit of belief into my actions. Ask as if it has already happened. I've heard people from Hulk Hogan all the way across the board talk about these things. And I only mention, okay, well, here's a better way. I've heard everyone from Hulk Hogan to Joe Rogan talking about these very topics. If I put the other name in there, got to add a rhyme, come on. Who wouldn't want to do that? But anyway, people across the board will talk about these things. The belief sometimes isn't the only thing. Because we can believe and we can achieve law of attraction level achievements, earnings, manifestations, people call it. We can do all of those things. And if all of what we ever ask for is materialistic, we might be granted all those material wishes. In addition to the materialistic, what if all we ever do is ask for things that it's not really our soul or our heart calling out for, but it's just our body calling out for? What if we only invest in those callings without ever testing the water, testing the salt, testing, is someone worth their salt? What if we never had a conversation that asked, hey, can I do better for you? What if I never asked if I could do better for you? Maybe I might never improve. My singing may never, ever have gotten to a point where it was even tolerable. My music, the abilities that I have, may never have improved. Because how could I even begin to impress you? So what if someone, like let's say our Creator, immediately showed up right now, and everything else, even this video, you just had it's shut off. Your Creator is there. Whoever you would call as quote unquote God. Our Creator shows up right there. It's your judgment time. Your life is over. Now you only have your judgment. And so what if our Creator showed up right now and said, what if it was me that our Creator showed up to talk with, and I was the one being judged? Tell me, Ray, can you play a song that tells me how much you have learned about whatever you think you were put here to learn about? Well, I feel like I've written several songs along those lines that are doing exactly that, talking about the experience that I've had. And even in telling people in my own words certain things, I've found the most unusual responses. People will tell me that I'm using AI to generate my words. It must be a pretty good system to have myself compared to AI. Must be a pretty good system. What if that system had no way to discern the truth? Especially if someone else was bearing false witness. We'd have a lot of anxiety, because now you don't know what can someone say in the presence of someone, but what about someone else? Can they say the same thing? Well, what about a group of so-so and another person? What if it was just your Creator? What if it was at the level of conversational awareness at all times, that we were simply thinking about a higher power as we were talking about these trivial things like manifesting, positivity, spending time with one another? Now, I bet you're wanting to ask a lot of questions or shut the whole thing down because there's so many words that have been said. But in the long run, this is 20 minutes that I could have been discussing this subject in person with anybody. And the last group that I used to do that with was my IT department, where I worked in the corporate world. And perhaps I made an impact talking with some of those co-workers of mine, friends of mine. Perhaps I made a difference, but in contrast, In so many cases, I've found people will go out of their way behind your back to say something completely opposite of what they're showing, even monetarily, towards one another. It comes down to free will. We're either following what's in our heart, or we're doing things from an egocentric point of view. I had one friend who would talk with me all the time until I didn't have money to give. I didn't have money to give when he asked me for help. But I also had money not given to me. On many levels, theft even. People have stolen from me. My work was not paid for. And in one case, I even gave a lot of money back to someone who did pay for my work. And I did it because they couldn't even stand to have a conversation with me, but it wasn't while we were talking with each other in person. We had a phenomenal time for an entire week. And then suddenly couldn't talk with me anymore because of something I said that must have impacted their ego so close to the heart that they had to shield themselves. When we try to live a double life, we will find ourselves the subject of our own insults. And that's when we start to get embarrassed because of the ego. A child, when it makes a mistake, child doesn't really dwell on it. A dog even doesn't dwell on it. Imagine a dog struck by an owner for wetting itself. I'm using an example like what my dad did to me, throw me headfirst into a tub as a toddler because I told him I had wet myself. I realized it, but I guess I had been taking a nap. I'm not really sure. My dad suffers from addiction, suffered even, depending on how his condition is when you get to see this. And in this addiction, he basically, someone stopped at the opposing stop sign before me, and they should have left already, but they didn't. So we were at a standstill. During these situations that I've encountered with parents who are addicts, it's possible my dad even gave me alcohol to put me to sleep. I don't know. There are things about me that differ from my friends considerably. And so for that reason, even the most hardened therapist might have difficulties unraveling all of the challenging things that I might think of in my particular circumstance. The only thing is, though, that our Creator knows us perfectly. Even my direct flesh creators know me the best personally. And so if I explain a situation to them, how I'm feeling, a symptom, they can understand me more than the general layperson, for an example. And I don't want to compare myself to this other person, but there was a person who murdered their girlfriend while they were on an extended road trip. Murdered their girlfriend on an extended road trip. And the parent did everything to hide their child. It reminds me of a parable in the Book of Peace that we use in our country called the Bible. And there's a story that was told. I don't even know that it was a parable, but it was an example of the two prostitutes and the two children that they had. They each had a child, and there was a trial, and the trial was being waged, whatever you would call it, legally. My dad could probably answer that. He went to law school, believe it or not. My dad, freaking genius, super smart. Anyway, so the two women each had a child. And back in these days, wherever the trial was being held, apparently DNA testing didn't quite exist in the way we know it yet. And the judge was presented with a case. And there were two women, each of which claimed that one child passed away and that their living child was their own child. So it wasn't this one's. The person, both of these people didn't want to have a dead child, and so they were arguing that they had, this child that was still alive, and nobody really knew who the real parent was of this child. And so the judge looked at these women of misdeeds and said, "Hey, I have a solution. What we'll do is we'll cut the baby in half, and then you each can have a part of this baby." And the judge was talking about the living baby. For you and I, we might automatically know, hey, when we cut this baby in half, it's not going to be alive anymore. Right? So imagine what the parent might think. What horror the parent might feel if they actually felt for their child. And that's basically what happened. Out of the two women, one said, "Yes, go ahead, do it." And the other woman was in intense agony over this possibility, cried and said, "No, give my child to this other woman," because she wanted her child to live. She cared about her child. When we're arguing over things for so long that we can't ever think back to the point where our anger got triggered to begin with. We can't ever self-reflect. Usually that's the feeling. That's the ultimate final feeling that many people get before they can no longer talk with me anymore. And they feel like they have to forcibly remove themselves from the conversations with me. Because I'm talking about these things in such a simple way that it's not that I want to talk about them. It's more, I don't want to spend time talking about a lot of anything else about my plans with someone who would never want to support my plans because they just secretly want me to fail over and over and over. And so here we are again, going for another walk, attempting to put a prayer out into the universe, asking for some reasonable rainfall for one another. I hope that we're able to make that request with one another. I hope that we're able to enjoy the day, the time that we've spent with one another, even if we're only doing it virtually. And I hope that we are blessed with health. Health is wealth. And for anyone who would try to mislead anyone else off of that path, well, to prepare for peace, you have to actively try and prepare for war. Once somebody is able to be in a position where they're empowered enough to do what's physically capable when other people can't do those things any longer, that's how you measure someone's fortitude. That's how someone's salt might be measured, someone's value. So for many people who are providing value to one another, just don't forget that sometimes the things that we need to do to provide value to one another don't include any kind of monetary contributions whatsoever. They mostly include just being able to actually hear one another and recognize that, hey, if there's so many people going to therapy, that means that my best friend so-and-so that I'm talking with might not have a comfortable time talking about X, Y, or Z. Maybe I should be doing a better job talking with my friend about A, B, or C. You know, there's all these different things that come to mind, but no matter how we divide it up, usually it's better not to divide the baby. I'm sure there's someone that's going to put in the comments why that might be a good idea or not, but usually it's not a good idea to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we've got now is a circumstance that can allow us all to communicate better, or we can continue oblivious without even recognizing the wake that we're leaving behind. So until next time, peace, love, and all that old school stuff.